Ka nui te mihi ki a koutou, ko whakataka tahau te ingoa o te karakia nei. Whakataka tahau ki te uru, whakataka tahau ki te tonga, kia mā kine ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hau. Tihei mauri.
E mihi atu ana ki a koe, Anton. Thank you for your karakia this morning and for opening our hui. So my name's Debbie Goodwin. I'm an independent evaluator and I'm part of the hosts for our hui over the next 3 days, and you'll get to meet some of them as we go along. To start with, I would like to have a little kōrero about grounding us in the kaupapa for the day. So we're here particularly probably because of the word co-design. Co-design is something that I've kind of delved into a little bit as an evaluator as part of my PhD research. And some of the things I guess I wanted to say this morning is that design in the broadest sense is about working together to design something new, obviously. And it's probably best to take that broader sense at this point in time. It's often coupled with the word innovation. So there's the idea that co-design will create positive changes, where it's been particularly difficult to make changes. So we're often relying on this term co-design to kind of create something new and be innovative. But as we talked and planned for this hui, we wanted to dig a little more deeper into what that actually means and what makes a change. One thing we know is that transformational change can come from community-led approaches, and that's one reason why co-design as a participatory method can work for change. But this is usually a long-term approach and has to overcome challenging processes. And I'm sure some of you have been a part of those challenges, and that's something we want to get into this week. So when we did plan this symposium as a rōpū, we wanted to go beyond the nuts and bolts of co-design and get to the real issues of what authentic partnership is, what authentic participation is that creates the change. That creates a change in people and systems and environments and in communities. So we're here to grapple with the real work of co-design, and hopefully you guys are coming along for the ride. These things might relate to relationships, dealing with power issues, understanding different paradigms that can get in the way of real change. Recently, Linda Tūhoe-Smith's made an address to Oranga Tamariki very recently in June. You can find her kōrero on YouTube. She gave an example of transformational change, and that was the Aotearoa reclamation movement through Kohanga Reo and Kura Kaupapa. These initiatives she talked about as something she was part of at the beginning, and what that took to create change. And she talked about being able to dream the impossible, striving to make it happen. So there was a lot of striving that made that happen. It was about understanding the intergenerational long game, and it was about building a vision from the ground up. So these are things that, we want to think about in this co-design kaupapa. She also reflected on the layers of ways of thinking, knowing, being and acting. So I thought that really, was bringing into the kōrero that we wanted to touch on as well. And also needing to dismantle particular paradigms that are getting in the way, such as racism. And just before we move on, I wanted to also refer to Shane Edwards' chapter in the book Dialogues of Mātauranga Māori, Remembering, it's called, discusses Māori ways of knowing, doing and being as necessary for Māori wellbeing. So what we want to think about, or what we think and what we do and how we are as people impacts how we work together in co-design. And this is what we wanted to discuss, bring to the front of the discussion this week, to encourage you to think about your own ways of being, knowing and doing in your work with others. What particular paradigms or worldviews and ways of being that you may be coming to inform your mahi. So that is just to start off our whakaro for the week. And I wanted to share a whakatauki that has been very dear to me through my 4.5 years of doing a PhD research. And it is e hara taku toa I te toa takitahi, engari he toa takitini. So my strength is not that of mine alone, but of the many. And that's, I think, very appropriate for this morning's, for our kaupapa of co-design, in that co-design is something that we do together. It is the strengths that we draw from all of us that are doing that co-design. It's not an individual pursuit. So kia ora and welcome. Really love to have you on board. Really excited about it. I know my other colleagues are as well. And so I would just now like to hand it over to Shenagh Gleisner from IPANZ to just welcome you as well. Kia ora.
No mai haere mai ki tēnei hui. He hare koa hau ko kei konei koutou. Teina koutou katoa. Ko Shenagh Gleisner taku ingoa. I'm the Executive Director of IPANZ, the Institute of Public Administration of New Zealand. This is a collective that's running this for you, including IPANZ. And it includes the Auckland Co-Design Lab, the Tuakana Evaluation Collective, Ngā Aho Māori Design Professionals, Allen and Clark, and IPANZ. IPANZ is a not-for-profit organisation, a membership organisation, absolutely committed to supporting the public service. We also are very keen on ensuring that public services are supported, public servants are supported in their development. But being an independent voice, we can push the boundaries a bit, which is what we want to do. Why co-design? Well, I've got 4 reasons. One, we perceived that it was an overused and abused word, often consultation wrapped in shiny co-design words. And we felt it was debased and not always used well. It's better that it's used properly or not at all. Secondly, we really think there needs a rethink about the way the public service does things for some of the most complex problems that we're facing. So that we create solutions with people, not deliver to them. We're absolutely committed to improving Māori Crown relations. And right from the outset, we wanted this session that was based on culturally grounded and Indigenous practices. Public servants want to learn about this. They have a lot to learn, and we want to support them. And lastly, genuine co-design is quite hard to do in the public service. We are serving ministers. We have a lot of rules and conventions and principles that we must honour. But I felt that the Public Service Act really opened up the possibility for greater collaboration. I just want to express my appreciation to Debbie, Desna, Robin and Penny, all of whom you'll meet, who have taken IPANZ on this journey with them. I also want to thank Lee and Baruch and Kim, who are doing the amazing work behind the scenes. Thank you. This has been, it's a tough journey because I have confronted some of my inbuilt biases and my ways of being that I need to question and I need to undo. I'm really grateful for this self-knowledge that I'm getting, and I urge you to grasp the opportunity to think about yourselves in the way that I've had to. I have 3 very brief ideas. Give this time. You're often asked to be agile and quick, but this ways of being needs time. Second, I think this is to be framed as you're an agent for change. Just imagine the people you'll be walking alongside have been used to being supplicants or delivered service. They're going to be creating the solutions. They will be doing this work, and imagine how empowering that is. And third, make sure you talk with your seniors about this, because we need an authorizing environment that enables you to thrive in this work. Nō reira, Teina koutou katoa. I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Penny Hagen.
Kia ora, Shenagh, tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā mihi nui ki a koe Anton Moa te karakia. Ngā mihi nui ki a korua Debbie and Shenagh for your welcoming and opening and setting the scene for us. Kei te mihio ki ngā mana whenua, tangata whenua o Aotearoa, tēnā koutou e ngā rangatira, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko ai au, he Pākehā hau, ki te tamaki makoro taku ingoa, taku kāinga a Ngāi, ko Penny Hagen taku ingoa. I am at the Auckland Co-Design Lab, as Shenagh said. Normally I'm in Manukau in South Auckland. We sit inside the Southern Initiative and are part local government, part central government, with our feet on the ground, working alongside community in South Auckland. It's our very great pleasure to be part of this conversation and part of this learning space. Big welcome to everybody that's here and giving up their mornings to be part of this kōrero and conversation. I'm really, it's a great privilege to walk alongside this particular hosting team and to hear from all the folks. I just want to mihi to everyone that's going to come and share their stories openly and generously over the next couple of mornings with us, and the challenges and the perspectives that they bring to help us explore this kaupapa together. My own perspective is as Pākehā. My background and training was in participatory design in Australia. And so my personal journey is to understand what that means and what co-design means within the context of the treaty. And I appreciate the leaders and practitioners that I've been able to learn from, many of whom are going to share with you over the next couple of days about that. The lab's role is to help build capability of the public service and public sector to work in more participatory ways and to engage in those practices, because as Shenagh and Debbie have said, those things we think are a critical part of enabling equity, intergenerational wellbeing, and building our capability to actually live the intent of treaty-based practice. And my job today, I have the pleasure of providing an overview for today and holding some of the sessions for us, creating the space for you to connect with each other and for us to hear from some different perspectives over today. You've heard the rationale for this event and us wanting to go beyond the terminology and really dig into issues of power sharing, working in relationship, different mindsets. We know that co-design is often positioned as a way to tackle issues of equity, and in particular to work with iwi and Māori communities. So we have to understand it within the context of Aotearoa and within the context of the treaty, and the ongoing structural issues of racism and colonisation that are embedded and that we're actually working with when we're trying to do things like co-design. We know that at times the busyness of doing co-design actually distracts us from addressing some of the real issues and moving forward on things. And worse, at times it can be another act of colonisation when we're importing Western methodologies and ways of being and knowing and doing again. So we really want to unpack what does it look like and hear from practitioners, whānau, community members and other public servants when they're leaning into these ways of working and when they are working relationally, trying to unpack issues of power sharing, values-led practice, seeking to shift structural inequities. What does that look like? What does that feel like? What does it mean to create space for the strengths and the know-how and the aspirations of whānau, of iwi, of community, to lead, to co-decide, to focus on the things that matter to them and the ways that matter to them? What does it actually look and feel like, and how can we work together to build that capacity within our public sector, within our communities? What do we need to do within government in particular to better enable those ways of working? What do we have to unlearn and confront? So I appreciate, Shenagh, your honesty in terms of your own journey on that process. And one of the key things for us is that this is about all of us, not just our organisations and our structures. So the invitation is very much to lean into that over the next couple of days. One of the ways we're going to do that, we've structured the 3 days so that we can kind of dig in firstly to understand what is this way of working, and we're going to hear a couple of different perspectives this morning. about what it looks and feels like, what does it take, and we're inviting you to think about what you hear about ways of being and knowing and doing as we listen to those stories and experiences. On day 2, we're going deeply into the ideas of relationships, power sharing, intentions, and hearing from practitioners that sit in between or alongside community and working with government, and to understand what they're grappling with in those spaces. And then on the 3rd day, we turn that gaze back to government, to the public sector, and have a look. So often in government, we look out at communities and think about what needs to be done. But so much of this work is looking back in at government and thinking about how our structures and our conditions and our ways of working are setting the conditions for better partnership, for better outcomes or not. And so turn that gaze back on some of our almost backroom processes and how they can perpetuate the status quo rather than achieve the things that we're talking about when we use terms like co-design. So that's the structure of the 3 days, and we really want to think about what we need to recognize, celebrate, cultivate, and challenge around these things. So how do we want to be together over the next couple of days? We really invite you to be open to the conversations, to observe your own ways of being, knowing, and doing. We have the reflection sheets that we've printed out for you so that you can do some of your own kind of individual thinking and capturing, as well as having conversations with others. And these concepts of being, knowing, and doing are deeply important, as Debbie said, for Indigenous practitioners. They're well-developed ways of thinking and talking about cultural practice in Aotearoa as well as in Australia, and we will have the opportunity to hear from those perspectives too. But also for government, we spend a lot of time focusing on the doing, but actually the being and the knowing is what shapes the doing. And so we really need, in order to think about change, as Debbie said, to pay more attention to the being and the knowing and what the assumptions are and the worldviews and perspectives behind that before we can really shift what we're doing in a way that's meaningful. So be open, use that opportunity to reflect for yourself, for your organisation, for your team, and share. Very much a sharing space. There's lots of expertise and experience on this call. There's many different people bringing in their thoughts, and so we want to create space to share with that and to recognise the different worldviews and experiences. My suggestion is that when you're in those spaces with others, that you're both generous with your kōrero, generous with your whakaro, but also frugal so that there's time for others to speak as well. So that balance of both of those things. And just be okay if some of it's challenging or uncomfortable, because that probably means we're finding some stretch spaces. Unless you've got a really bad chair and you need to change it because it's not going to do good for your back sitting here for 3 hours. So if you need to get up and move around while we're having these conversations, please do that. And we do have a break in the middle just to allow you to get back into your body a little bit. So I will stop talking in a minute, but this is just the housekeeping in terms of the doing together. We are recording these main sessions. We're not recording the breakout sessions. So they are just your personal conversations, but we will ask you to capture some reflections back and share those to the group. We are using different types of tools, chat, Slido, and breakout, so that people can have connections. Do mute while you're on the main session, but please turn on your video on the breakout so you can see each other and you can have that conversation and meet. And that's an important part of this process. And the 3 days is us being able to connect and see who else is in these conversations and build that connection. If you can, if you're called something like Android 898764, I encourage you to rename yourself so that people can call you by your name when you're in the breakout room. And if you do have any tech issues, Ryan is on the chat, and just direct any questions that you've got to her. So just moving into today then, we're going to get 2 different perspectives and stories around what this might look like and the value of this mahi, what it is, what does it take. But first of all, we really want to start with each of you and where you're at and in your world, what's going on. This is the reflection sheet that you would have received. If you don't have it printed out in front of you, it's fine. You can just scribble on a piece of paper, that's fine. But we really want you to start grounding in your own world and your own space where you're at. And the idea of value and values is really critical to thinking about this practice. So we're just going to actually start by pausing and giving you the opportunity to think about the values that guide your mahi. So this is 30 seconds, a minute of just thinking. And on the first page, there's a space for you just to write, what are some of the values that guide your mahi? So this is tuning into you and your own practice and your world and what guides you. So I'm going to stop talking for 30 seconds or so, and you're going to write down and capture a word or two about the values that guide your mahi. Kia ora. Great. So now what I want us to do is share something about that, so we can start to see as a collective where are we coming from, what guides us, what's important. So this is for us to have a bit of a collective brain across the motu, but also for us to test some of the tech that we're going to be using over the next couple of days. So we can have a go now. So if you go into the chat, there is a link in the chat that you can click on, and it will take you to a Slido. And it's going to invite you to put in 1 or 2 words. Just do 1 word at a time. You can come back and add another one, that shape the values that shape your mahi. So I'm just going to let you find the link and put that in, and we'll just wait for a minute for us to build that collective view of the kinds of values that people are guided by. Wonderful. So we can just start to see here a little bit of the kinds of things that are important to the people across this group, and the kinds of terms that come to people's minds that guide you and ground us. Manaakitanga, justice, partnership, whanaungatanga, restoration, honesty, equity, fairness, kindness, compassion. You can keep adding things in here, so we can keep building that out, and I'll capture that. But what I would like us to do now is to take that grounding question about the values that shape your mahi and just use that as a way to introduce yourself. So we're going to put you now into breakout groups. We've had the opportunity to do a little bit of introduction. Unfortunately, we don't get to hear from everybody, and you don't get the opportunity to bump into each other at the coffee table, or how we would normally do it when we're coming in and out of a face-to-face. So we have to be deliberate about creating those opportunities. And so we're just going to spend 5 or 10 minutes now just taking the opportunity for you to let people know where you are, where you're from. That can be up to you, whether you're talking from a personal perspective or organizational, and just either share what you captured as your kupu and why, or what you observed about the other words that came up from other people. So we're just going to give you 5 or 10 minutes. We'll let you know when there's a minute to go. Just take the time to introduce yourself and have a little bit of a conversation about those words. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully there was enough time just to check in, say hello, have a little bit of a conversation, and we'll be using that method of just time for your own thinking, time for listening, time for reflection, time for sharing, just over the 3 mornings. So those breakout spaces are really important times for you to process and share across all the different expertise and perspectives of people on this call. So awesome. So I'm going to shift us now into our kind of first space of the morning, I guess. Today's shape or kind of wrapper is this question around the value of the mahi. What is it? What does it take? And we're going to get the opportunity to hear some different experiences and perspectives around that. As suggested by the reflection sheets and the kind of questions there, we really want you to take that. I mean, by all means, you take out everything and anything that's meaningful to you, but we particularly want to invite people to pay attention to what they're hearing and building that sort of collective listening around ways of being, knowing and doing, and about the value of this way of working and what that might mean for how we think about outcomes differently or ways of working differently. And so to start us on this journey, 2 amazing wahine. I'm really excited to be able to have Cheree, Shortland, Nuku and Leigh Sturgiss join us this morning from the Ministry of Health, and they're speaking on mahi that they've done over a period of years and can really take us through the story of the process and the journey. They've got strategic learning, pragmatic learning, and can kind of put forward from the complexity of a ministry's perspective, what was involved in the journey, what their learning has been, and share that back to us. And so I'm going to give them the air and the space and the time, but ngā mihi nui kia korua, really privileged to have you. I'm going to stop sharing now, put it over to them, and they'll take us through the story of their mahi. Please put any pātai, any questions in the chat as you go, and then we're going to have time to do some questions with them after they've finished sharing. So kia ora.
Kia ora. Well, kia ora tātou. Ko Cheree, Shortland, Nuku, toko ingoa. Ko hikirangi tītai tokerau te maunga, ko kaukau te awa ngāpoi te iwi he uri hau o Ngāti Hine. Ko te whānau Shortland no pipi wai hau. Yeah, kei te mihi, kei te mihi, kei te mihi. I'm Cheree Shortland Nuku. I hail from the beautiful far north, and I'm the manager of the Māori policy team in the Māori Health Directorate. I'm here with my colleague Leigh, who is one of the senior advisors in the tobacco control team. And we are grateful to be able to come here and share our journey, I guess, and thank you to the IPANZ team for inviting us. We've called it Designing for Equity, and it's basically sharing our design journey in the context of tackling smoking inequity, particularly for wahine Māori, but really with a central government agency context that we are involved in. So I guess overall it's really about partners designing with partners, and we just wanted to talk about that. I know time is short, so we won't be able to cover all of it, definitely won't be able to go deep into the content, but we do want to tell you a little bit about our process and hopefully share what it was about and like. Just want to start with this. Some of you will know this, in fact you all know this, probably there are some really big challenges that in central government that we're all grappling with. In terms for Māori, the burden of inequity in terms of those outcomes falls unevenly on Māori. Smoking is one of those, and smoking is the root cause of so many other non-communicable diseases. The underpins cancer, heart disease, respiratory, etc. So with that in mind, these are the latest results that we could get, and so we can show you that from 2006 to 2020, the smoking prevalence has reduced from about 17% to 10% for non-Māori, non-Pacific, from 39 to 28% for Māori, and then for 24 to 18% for Pacific people. So if you take non-Māori, non-Pacific, who are around about 10%, Māori are still up around the 28% in terms of their smoking rate. So even with a whole lot of work, the equity gap remains, even though the rate's falling. That's a real wicked problem that we're all trying to solve. I guess this one is about, so where you've got these wicked problems, where they're intractable, where they're really difficult to solve, even with the best efforts, even with the best policy decision making, even with the best tactics, we've still got these gaps we have to deal with. So this is a snapshot of the policy work that the tobacco control team have been undertaking over quite a few years, quite a long time. And you can see that, and you'll know that yourself, because we're living in a society where smoking is no longer prevalent. You'll see from the red line that we're raising possibly a smoke-free generation down there. And we've had to do a whole range of different things, from big regulatory reform to tobacco control programs to tax, you name it. So all the tactics are in there. But even with the best efforts, we haven't been able to really tackle the inequity between Māori and non-Māori. I know that the modelling says that with a smoke-free goal, which is a smoke-free 2025 goal, with what we're currently doing and everything we're throwing at it, we wouldn't meet that smoke-free 2025 goal for Māori until around 2061. So we had to think a little bit differently, and we had to think, well, what can we do different? So with those wicked problems in mind, and with in around 2017, the ministry was going through its own journey about how to bring people closer to its business. We wanted to think about tackling that program with a focus on young Māori women. So what I have here in front of you is the journey we'll probably take you on. These are the documents that are published online. There are 4 phases here, from the exploring and insight gathering right through to service redesign and impact on services and outcomes for people. Yeah. So this is phase 1. So just very briefly, the first phase was definitely about insight gathering. It was about unlocking the insights, unlocking new insights into the place of smoking in the complex lives of wahine Māori. It was trying to identify new ideas and new opportunities that the ministry could take. It definitely had a think big, start small, move fast kind of approach. and a learn by doing ethos underpinning it. I guess the other thing I should say is why young Māori women, and I do want to say this, is even though smoking rates are huge for Māori across the board, 18 to 24-year-old young Māori women smoke at 6 times more than non-Māori women. They're young, they're healthy, they're not near the health system, and investment in their lives is an investment not only in their life chances, but in their tamariki, they're having babies more than other people, other cohorts, and in their whānau well-being. So it was a cohort, high-value cohort that we really wanted to focus on. Another part here in terms of the ministry's journey is just getting those conditions right. This wasn't normal in the ministry. We don't do it this way. So we had to make sure we had the authorising environment, and we definitely needed leadership on the top. So we had the support of our DG at the time. We set up a governance, very governance-like kind of a group of executive ELT members, leadership team members, try to guide the program. We set up an expert advisory group chaired by Hagen, who was a clinical lead nationally for tobacco at the time. We put a multidisciplinary team together. So we invited people from right across the ministry. So we had those different perspectives, everything from data and digital to policy were involved in the process, and they were up for it. We also know that you needed to have others in the process. So we invited other experts and design people to be in part as well. I guess the underlying part there was that we wanted everyone to come to the process with an experimental mindset, to suspend their judgment, to be open to learning. And that's not easy in government organisations where you're all about problem solving. So it was pretty challenging to start with, I'd say. This one here. So I guess one of the things is, one of the lessons we learned is through the process that you can't outsource insight. Tacit knowledge isn't just information, and often in government we outsource the information, then we use the information to design programs or make policy decisions. We decided to flip that around and actually learn ourselves, and so the whole notion of that information, that knowledge is needs to be tacit was a really important part. So we were trying to exercise our empathy muscle, I suppose. So we did a couple of different things. One of them was we wanted to make sure that we were rich in terms of the data we were collecting, and we were also marrying that up with people insights. So that was interesting. We didn't know how to use the IDI back in 2017. Not many organisations did. So we had social investment people come and coach some of our people about how to use the IDI. We asked different questions of that data. So that's the big infrastructure that all government agencies have to put their information into. So it becomes a spine for New Zealand's population. So we thought about the research questions we wanted to ask of the IDI in terms of the population of young Māori women. Where do they live, work, play, belong? And then we had people coaching us on how to gather that information. Besides the IDI information, we also did an evidence brief. So what is the evidence about smoking amongst young Māori women or rangatahi Māori? Very little of it. We looked at the statistics, we looked at the data. So we spent quite a bit of time staying on the problem, trying to understand the problem with the data. But at the same time, we wanted to make sure we had people insights as well. So at the bottom of that slide, it was that whole triangulation of rich data insights and people insights and wider system thinking insights or wider system variables that we tried to bring together to try to understand the problem. Not about solving it, just about understanding it. So one of the things we did here was that we buddied up, besides the data insights. Actually, I just want to go back there and just tell you a little bit about this. What you'll see from the data is that it's no surprise to you, is that the more you smoke, you're living in challenging situations, the more complexities you have in your life. We also found that from the ages of 18 to 24, when they're 18, 2 in 3 young Māori women smoked. By the time they were 24, 1 in 3 smoked. There was a correlation between their smoking and the number of children they were having. And that if their lives were less complex, you would see that actually, they had other sorts of life chances. So smoking was part of a much more complex picture about the lives of young Māori women. Yeah. So this part was when we thought, so besides understanding their data, how can we learn more about their lives? How can we understand the place of smoking in their lives? It wasn't about why are you smoking, it was about understanding the place of smoking in their lives. So we buddied up with our design partners, which was Think Place at the time, to undertake empathy interviews. We interviewed rangatahi Māori from Northland right through to Porou. We learnt that accessing the voices of Wahine Māori is not divorced from the providers and the communities of which they were part. Government agencies very rarely get that close to consumers, but we worked with our trusted partners and we did that together. We made sure they were ethical and culturally responsive and kai and koha, that it was a power sharing experience, that we weren't exploiting, it was to make sure that we were having these conversations and they wanted to have these conversations with us. And that was a really powerful experience for most of the people who were involved in that. I guess the big part was grappling with the sense making. So, getting those key insights from what the young Māori woman was saying. So we, besides that, we mapped the life journeys of the young Māori woman, and we talked to, so you got some here, we mapped their life journeys and we developed persona, we gathered those insights, we had very challenging conversations between our data people and our insight gathering, we were checking our assumptions, we were challenging our assumptions, and we took that back so that we made sure that we checked back with the Wahine Māori and the providers that we were partnering with, to see, is this your experience? Does this make sense to you? And most of them were, yes, this is my experience. And so we knew we had had a tipping point of sort of getting the views that they had in front in terms of their lives and the smoking in it. I guess in the end, we spoke to about 50 Wahine Māori who were daily ex or non-smokers. And I guess the other thing about that was that whole experience, that whole multidisciplinary experience, the having the coaching of experts working alongside us, created some real powerful mindsets of the people who worked in the program. So Jane Chambers, who's happy for me to talk about that, was the manager of the tobacco control team at the time. She said, I knew our interventions weren't working for young Māori women, but now I know why. And the reason I know why is because I've heard their stories. And that was really the big critical part, is that the change, that powerful mindset change, changed the way she thought, that the ministry thought about its policy decisions, its assumptions about what people need, the way it thought about its resourcing, so that we started to change the way we thought about what we did here. Phase 2, so from the insight gathering, we now went into prototyping. So we took those insights and we invited 4 stop smoking providers to partner with us. And these were providers who were already doing pretty amazing, innovative things anyway. And so we asked them, would you like to work with us? We've got these insights. Some of them were part of those insights. And we spent 2 days rapid prototyping, using the insights, unpacking them, understanding them. And then each of the providers thought about those insights in the context of the work that they did. And they developed a prototype that they wanted to then take back to their communities, invite young women to be part of it, and to co-design with the young women how those actually played out. So there was apart from the prototyping, we wanted to make sure that they had permission to innovate, and that was challenging. I don't think they're used to having permission to innovate. I think it's pretty compliance driven. So having the opportunity to innovate was, I don't think they believed us to start with. We also gave them evaluative coaches, and Debbie was one of those. Thank goodness, Debbie, you were. So each of the 4 providers had an evaluative coach working alongside them, supporting them using a developmental evaluation approach, helping them to document their journey and to reflect back on what they were learning. We also enabled them to have co-design support. So if they were thinking about how they design their program, they might get some support in there about the how, whereas the evaluative coaches were how well is your program meeting the needs of the young Māori woman who you were co-designing with. So the co-designing with the Wahine Māori was a powerful experience for the providers. They certainly learned things along the way. They certainly challenged their own assumptions. When one of the services had 11 Wahine Māori who had 32 children under 3 between them, and they wanted to meet 3 times a week. If you were responsive to them, how are they going to be able to resource that? So it was definitely being responsive required you to suspend your own views about how things should be and then to work with them. We also developed a community of practice so that the providers could come back together, share their experiences, share their ideas, get the support they need, that we would be able to respond to what they needed and do that. So that was over about a 6-month period that we did that. In the end, I think there were 4 small-scale achievable prototypes, and these were the common success factors when you distilled it down. That came out. They won't be a surprise to you. So, you know, taking that holistic approach to enabling young women to live their best lives. It wasn't just about stopping smoking. In fact, it was hardly anything about the smoking. It was about smoking in the place of their lives. What do they want for their lives? Reframing quitting in the context of living well. That was what they told us as well, is that actually it wasn't about they wanted to have a flourishing life. And so what were they going to be able to replace in their lives rather than take something away? The whole notion of being responsive isn't about predetermining what they need, but responding to what they need, ask for, aspire to, require. And then the whole underpinning of language, identity and culture in the context of their pilots were really success factors. These are some of the results, I would say, that came through from the evaluation. And I guess the whole point is when you take a whole of life approach to tackling problems, working collaboratively and co-creating change with people, then you'll get a whole of life outcome. So the whole notion of paiora. So these were some of the outcomes that were achieved as a result of the prototyping. Yeah. Just before Leigh talks, so from one of that, Leigh's going to talk a little bit here. After those 2, the insight gathering to the prototyping to the co-design with the providers, after that it's like, okay, so what's next? So ka pū te ruha, ka hau te rangatahi came from Dr. Tairahi Black, and it was about ushering in a new and fresh approach, and with rangatahi at the helm. So the whole idea was what we've learnt, our commitment to the wahine Māori and the process we've been on with our partners is how do we distill this down and now help services to be able to design and respond to the needs and aspirations of wahine Māori.
Thanks, Cheree. So yes, so this was the phase 3 work that we did, and this took place over 2019. So we were, it was important that we worked with our stop smoking services to actually address the needs of these women, and this guidance development was part, or the main part of that work. So this work was based on phases 1 and 2, and it was developed using the principles from the evaluation and the insights from the wahine, and it encompassed 3 core values and 9 principles. The core values were that as much as possible, the service experience needed to be co-designed or wahine-led, that the services should match the diverse needs, preferences and lived realities of the young wahine Māori, and that stop smoking advice really needed to be considered in the context of other life goals and needs rather than solely focusing on stopping smoking. That was a big challenge for our services, in that stopping smoking was the expectation, that is why people walked in the door, and now we are working in a new way, and I'll get onto that later on. So we used this phase 3 process to further stress test the 5 key elements for success. And Cheree has already gone over those, but a holistic well-being approach, reframing quitting in the context of living well, being responsive to the needs of the women, making non-smoking more attractive than smoking, and absolutely ensuring that culture was a connector and an enabler. An expert working group came together 4 times over a 4-month period to consider all of those outputs and to co-create a set of principles to help best guide best practice for our stop smoking providers to work with young Māori women. That working group consisted of practitioners, evaluation experts, clinical experts, commissioning and policy staff from within the ministry, and of course researchers and designers from ThinkPlace. The working group concluded that there were 3 core values and 9 principles of good practice. And I've already gone over those core values, but they're very, very much embedded in the work. Our services are taking into account that the needs of the women are forefront when they're designing services, that they're matching the diverse needs and preferences and the lived realities of the young Māori woman, and that stop smoking advice needs to be considered in the context of other life goals. And surprisingly, it may not work if it's solely focused on the smoking. Over to you, Cheree.
One of the things you often do in government is when you develop guidance, as opposed to frameworks. We have a lot of frameworks, we don't have a lot of guidance. So that was another thing we tried to do, is co-design the guidance, building on what we'd learned. But we do a set and forget. So we put the guidance out into the sector and then we forget about it and hope that something changes. So this time we decided to be a little bit different. We wanted to check back, because the whole process has been evidence informed. We've made sure that we've documented our journey, we've checked back, we've made sure we've woven it through. So this time was about checking back and checking in with the service providers and just checking how they were feeling in terms of applying the guidance to their services. We found, and we did this during lockdown last year actually, but it still worked. So we found out there's actually a continuum of confidence from those who love it, already doing innovative things, applied it, just enhanced what they were already doing, to others who loved the values, liked the ideas, weren't sure how to start, pretty overwhelmed. As a result of that, we were able to think about, we developed some persona. So these are provider persona. So if you thought about this provider, you might think about how you support them this way. So we were able to tailor our service and services and differentiate the support that we provided. And that was the whole point. It was about sort of creating these new insights that we could then feed back into the way we resource providers, the way we supported them to apply the guidance.
And now we move into our business as usual approach. So we have a current range of stop smoking providers. We fund 16 across the Motu. We talk to them. We launched this guidance document in about November 2019, very softly, and encouraged them to use the guidance in service design and delivery. We indicated we would be making contractual changes later on once people got used to it. We hold quarterly meetings with our providers where the evidence and the guidance is socialised. There's opportunity for sense making, advice and sharing of information. We absolutely encourage a permission, a culture of permission where they're safe to fail, that they must, they can try things, they can try whatever they like. If it doesn't work, stop it and try something else. The innovation message to providers was not heard initially, and I think it's fair to say it's only been in the last 6 months or so that our services have absolutely embraced the innovation message, and now they really genuinely are trying things. We're providing support as best we can, either through sharing good news stories or providing cultural or workforce development support. Our data is, I know we're running out of time, our data isn't great, and we're working to improve that. But from the very beginning of this process to where we are now, well, I've got data from July 19 to December 20. So over an 18-month period, which is in about the time period that we're working on this, approximately 2,400 young Māori women have enrolled in the stop smoking services aged between 18 and 30, compared to approximately 1,400 non-Māori, non-Pacific. So the work that our services are doing to encourage young Māori women to enrol in a stop smoking service and to get support to quit is almost doubled. It's been a fantastic achievement, and we're very, very proud of everyone who's been working on this process. We'd, of course, without these marvellous young wahine, we wouldn't be where we are today. This is a snapshot of 4 beautiful young women and their babies in Eastern Bay of Plenty. These weren't part of the original
Prototypes.
cohorts or prototypes, but look, we have just had the amazing support from a whole lot of providers. They've just finished a program. They're now smoke free, and they're doing really, really well. And I guess finally, I just want to finish on a measure of success, and it's not what we think, it's what the participants think. So this is just a summary of some quotes from the young Hine themselves. It shouldn't be called a quit smoking program, it's a bettering yourself program or a change of life program. So we're thrilled, I'm absolutely thrilled to be part of this work. It's continuing, it hasn't stopped, it keeps on evolving, it's not perfect. There's always room for improvement, but I feel very, very lucky to have been a very small part of the process.
And just to finish on this, I know time is short, but I showed you at the end the first 4 reports. This is the wrap up. So we called it Designing Out Inequity, and we did that deliberately. I guess the point about this is we wanted to capture all of what we told you in a case study, because what we don't have in central government enough of is our own stories. We tell the stories out there, but we don't tell our own central government agency design stories. Professor Hayden McRobbie said when he was part of our multidisciplinary team, this makes sense to me. He said, moving forward, we need leadership and clear direction. We need co-design, multidisciplinary approaches and innovative thinking. And I would add that we need willing partners and we need safe places to try and learn. And we need to do that at central government as well. So this is the actual case study. It's an end-to-end summary of the program. The thing about now is that better commissioning is very much an important part of the changes in the health and disability system. We need a model of services that are innovative, that are kaupapa Māori driven and led, that are whānau centred, that are holistic, and that are designed and delivered by those who are closest to the people who want to be part of that process. So in closing, Te Tura Here Tangata is one of the whakatauki in one of the documents here, which is the threads that bind us. And I think that is about designing. It's relational, it's adaptive, it's evidence informed, and it's responsive to the people who we're here to serve. So, kia ora.
Kia ora, that was awesome. Thank you so much, Leigh and Cheree. Just many questions to pick up on there and not enough time. But what we want to do just before we get into the Q&A, so thank you again for just starting us off with that really rich visually, orally, and in terms of the content, things to think through. I'm just going to give everybody a minute to capture some of what they've heard. So it's just a minute to make some notes on your reflection page or your document about what you heard in that, what stood out, what you were hearing about value. I'm just going to put up a slide just for a minute and give you time just to do a little bit of processing. Drop a pātai in the comments if you want. There's a few questions that have already come through, and then we're just going to come back and explore a couple of those questions with Cheree and Leigh. So just take a minute just to do some of your own cognitive processing about what we've just heard. Awesome. So just giving everyone a little time for processing, because we've got lots to talk about and listen to over the next couple of days. So I'm just going to pull out a couple of the questions and some of the things that stood out about what you've shared. As you said, there's so much richness and so many kind of building blocks that you're sharing with us, which is amazing. I'm interested, just maybe if we step back and think about the types of, obviously you're paying attention to the shifts and uptake and the different experiences that Wahine are having in their experiences with providers, but you've also named a bunch of other things that were different and approaches. So stepping back to when you started this process and what you thought you might be heading towards. Has it changed? Did the process itself take you to a different place than when you thought you'd started? So the actual thinking about what's important, what outcomes were delivered, did they shift over that time?
No, they didn't, because we didn't know what we wanted in the end. That was the very first principle. Is all we knew is that we needed to suspend our judgment, have experimental mindset, not say how we're going to solve smoking, but what is the place of smoking, and then use a scaffolding approach, a responsive approach, a designing forward approach, really. So where we are now compared to where we wanted to get, we wanted results, we wanted services to be better for young Māori women, we wanted providers to feel more confident. All those things in terms of an end-to-end design process were there, but we had no preconceived perception about what we were wanting to achieve.
Awesome, thank you. And in terms of the shifts that were required, so you talked about changes in how you did resourcing, I imagine how the reporting was done and some of the policy setting. So once you'd reframed some of the, well, there was a reframing process that occurred when you were working with the providers and wahine around the issues and how they saw things. The shifts that occurred at the sort of commissioning end and the management of contracting and things like that, were they things that could have been done anyway, but we weren't for whatever reason? Or were they changes that we actually had to make to some of our structural conditions? Because I think one of the questions that people grapple with sometimes is, do we do it this way out of habit, or do we do it this way because there is a particular policy or rule around commissioning and contracting that we need to follow? And did you find that you actually needed to really change things structurally, or it was more about building people's confidence, or to do it differently, for example?
Yeah, I suppose it was a little bit of a combination. We certainly needed all the work that we did to build the evidence to then support the culture change. And we needed to bring our providers along on the journey with us. I think if we had tried to do this
to ram it through,
then it just wouldn't have worked. So yeah, and by working with our providers over the whole course of this work, I mean, primarily the latter phases really impacted on them, but they were aware of is that they felt they were being taken along on the journey themselves and could see the value of the changes we were trying to make. And it's fair to say that the majority have absolutely embraced the new way of working. Some have got a little bit more work to do, or grow confidence in being able to do that. And I think the contractual changes that we made have helped the providers enter into the spirit of this, and also to co-design the services that they are providing to the wahine Māori, and that is also iterative, because the young Māori women that came in last week are going to be different to the ones coming in next week. So it's a consistent change.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. The other part of it is we talk equity, we have the rhetoric of equity, but often we don't change our system processes to actually do something about it and give a very clear message about that. That was very clear, that your priority is to address those who are least well served in the system. That was a clear message, and as a result we will redesign the measures, what you report on, how you report, how we support you. So some of that was a part of it, but we were, what I realized is that commissioning is a very compliance driven. There's a very strong set of cultural norms and organisations about commissioning. So the shift from the rhetoric of partnership to the real intentional changes in the system for partnership does take time.
And what I'm hearing you say is that in some cases it's structural, in some cases it's cultural, that actually the potential is there, it's actually our capability to do it and confidence to do it. So it's both of those things, yeah. And what were some of the ways then that you took those providers and other partners on the journey and made it possible? One of the things you talked about was people not really believing in innovation, that they had that scope, and that for some people it's taken time, and that is a big shift, right, for us both to offer structurally as government and for providers to realise that we're not saying you've got to compete with each other here, you've got to follow these things. It's actually a different environment. What were some of the things that helped people to shift into those ways of working?
I just think that I guess it was their belief that we genuinely really meant that they could work innovatively, and that the safe to fail environment was absolutely what we meant. And so those things took a little bit of time to come to fruition, I guess. But we had willing partners. Our services are wonderful. That they're based in communities. They know what their communities want.
And once you took the funding away from from the accountability, you released them from that. So there was a fear early on in the early phases that I won't get funded if I do something different because I have to do this and then I get funded for it. So that early on conditioning of funding attached to deliverables was an inhibitor of innovation, actually.
Yeah.
So that shifted.
Yeah, and it's actually quite difficult when we're funding stop smoking service providers to actually, in the first 3 or 4 meetings with these young women, is not talk about stopping smoking. Is a bit unusual, and our services are now engaging with these young women over manicures and eyelash extensions and their whānau, and then when there's a connection or trust, then we can talk about other aspects in these women's lives, and that is where the guidance comes into play. So yeah, it was wonderful to be part of this shift.
But the other thing is to bring all the partners with you. That partners designing with partners is really important. All the different perspectives, all the people who have some kind of influential authority in the process have to be along the journey. Everywhere from your ELT walkthroughs, everywhere from your agency all-comer meetings, everywhere from your community of practice workshops, everywhere, you have to bring everyone on the journey. It is definitely a relational change agenda.
Yeah.
I know people are going to want me to ask more about that, but I'm just going to jump to the thing you talked about then in terms of whole of life, and that shift from saying this is about funding smoking cessation to saying actually what we're supporting is for people to live the lives that they want to lead. Now, what does that take? And within that, smoking is, what's the place of smoking in that? Yeah. That's a pretty significant reframing, both from a conceptual perspective and a funding and resourcing and tracking perspective. Can you talk a bit more about the implications for both the providers and for yourselves from a government perspective of shifting to that more holistic? You just touched on it then a little bit in terms of, the first conversation isn't about smoking. Could you talk a bit about the implications of that?
Well, I guess we're still working through the implications of that, and we don't want our practitioners to be experts in everything, but we need them to know who is an expert in their community. Yeah. We have several of our providers are whānau audit providers anyway, so of course they've got the expertise there, and we're very much guided by them. But it is just actually a lot of that change has come from our providers themselves, and we just, it's a little bit hard to answer, Penny. We just encourage them to try things, but what we know is that in a generalized sense, once these young women's lives are better, once they're in safe housing, once they've got dealing with other drug or alcohol issues, once their children are in early childhood education, once they're living in a safe environment, is actually they're not so reliant on their nicotine addiction. And so it just magically works. I mean, tobacco is highly addictive, so I don't want to minimize that. But when their lives get better, then they can deal with the stresses that life throws at them. And
which is what they told us.
Yeah.
So holistic's an interesting thing. We Kaupapa Māori services are all about that. It's the whole person. But how to make that holistic? There were some tensions for some of the stop smoking coaches. I can't be something else, you don't have to be that, but you have to have those fundamental listening, empathy, triage skills. So I think everyone's trying to do it different. I think the whole of the government sector is trying to do more holistic services, but what that means is going to be an interesting journey as we unpack a whole range of different service lines and funding and borders, which is what the Public Service Act's trying to do.
Absolutely right. That's going to be an ongoing thing for us because we've been so well trained to focus on the things around which our agency is primarily supposed to fund. So when we have to start looking outside that and connect those things up. So we won't have the answers today, but that's definitely a key part of the work. We're just about to go to a break, but I'm just going to ask one more question. There's lots there, and maybe what we'll do is we'll collect them up and send them to you on the off chance that you've got a minute to respond to some of those. I know people are really keen to hear more, and they're asking for the reports, and some of it will be in there too, so we'll be able to share that back. People are just interested in some of the messiness and some of the practices that ensured the process was genuine. So it's, you know, there's lots of words we can use. What were some of the things that actually you felt were significant to demonstrating the meaningful intent and some of the messiness that was in that?
It's always messy when you're trying to change norms in organisations. I'll have to say one of those is that authorising environment, you know, that executive leadership, commitment from the top, making sure you rigor that up. That's really, really important to create the environment for innovation. If you don't get that right, if you don't have the support of your leaders, then you're really going to struggle to be able to innovate actually in organisations. So there was messiness. Some of the other messiness was around the unclear definitions of what co-design really was. That we had some harm in the organisation before we started this, people using the term but not actually practising it appropriately. So we did a little bit of work of trying to unpack co-design and that. But what I will say is what you saw when I talked about in this process is that we did insight gathering at the beginning. It wasn't very much co-design, but there was co-design in the process. And one of the things that really powerful to me was one of the young women said to me, "It's, you know, I'm happy to tell you my story and thank you for listening, but it's not my job to do your job." So, you know, you have to be very careful about when you are inviting people to a co-design process and when you're not. You're there to honour them in the work that you do and are responsible for.
Kia ora. Awesome. That's a really fantastic note to end on in terms of what our various roles and responsibilities are in this mahi. So again, our deepest appreciation for your time and preparation and sharing this work with us. I know lots of people will be going now and following that up and are interested in the reports, and so we'll make all those things available. Really appreciate what you've shared, and I know we could have gone on for much longer. So thank you again, koroa, ngā mihi nui, and we'll see you all soon. Kia ora. So welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you've got some notes down on your reflection sheets. And now we're going into the second half of this morning's session about value and experiences. And we're going to hear a different set of perspectives and stories from another amazing group of wahine. And it's the same thing for this session. Really just invite you to listen to what they're offering us and what they're sharing about what they're doing, but also the being and knowing, the ways of working, the value of these experiences that they're going to share for us. So we're going to, in a minute, hand over to Angie tonight, who's part of the Southern Initiative, also Celia, Hirini, and He Whānau Whānui o Papakura. Really just, a great privilege to be able to hear this deep, long experience that you're all sharing, and to take your time today to come and join us in this kaupapa, in this conversation. I will hand over to Angie to do the introductions, but ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, welcome. Kia ora.
O, no reira, he mihi mahana ki a tātou e hui hui mai nei. Nau mai haere mai ki tēnei kōrero mō te mahi pai o He Whānau Whānui o Papakura. Kia ora everybody, I'm Angie, Tangaere, no te taira whitia hau. I'm part of the Southern Initiative, get to work alongside an amazing Penny and Brooke and many other people on the call. And it's been my privilege to support our mahi here in Papakura, which we're going to tell you a little bit about, but I'll just hand it over to the whānau to introduce themselves. Hi, I'm Ruapani. I am a stay-home mum. I have 6 children, 1 on the way, so 7. I have a granddaughter, I joined this group because I needed new friends and to get out of my comfort zone. I was starting to self-isolate, and it has really helped being here. It has helped me heal from things in my past that I didn't want to face, and just having these lovely, I say women because sometimes some of us bring our partners, like, yeah, just meeting them, it's been really awesome.
Kia ora. Ko Colleen Koni tōku ingoa. I have been pretty much living in Papakura for 30 plus years. I'm mother of 7 kids who are actually whānau from previous relationship. However, what made me become a part of this rōpū is because I can see a definite change in the way the system and everything. Yeah, I just can see a big change in whānau-led, yeah, pretty much whānau-led rōpūs like the one we have. But yeah. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. Ko wai au, ki te taha o tōku māma, no Tūhoe ki Ruatahuna, ki te taha o tōku papa, no Tūhoe ki Whakatōhea, Ngāti Ruapani, me Ngāti Kahungunu ki Hirini. Kia ora everybody, I'm Celia, Hirini. It's my pleasure to work alongside Angie, Tangaere from TSI, and Penny and the team at TSI there, the co-design lab, and also the wonderful people here, Papakura Marae, who make the Marae a really authentic way of working. And I believe that Angie and I have, we've cracked that partnership and we're doing it really, really well at the moment. But I'm really enjoying the MAHI. That's inside the process, and even the whanaungatanga that all of us get to do. So nice to meet you, everybody. Kia ora.
All right, Whānau, what we're going to do is we're going to share a little bit about our journey. We've been together for about 1.5 years. Penny's just said, will I talk to what's the Southern Initiative? Good point, Penny. The Southern Initiative is nested inside of the Auckland Council, so it's part of the social innovation capacity of Auckland Council. We were focused on innovation for better outcomes for whānau living in South Auckland, but we've also been working with whānau in West Auckland. So our job is to figure out what can we be doing differently to get different results for our whānau. So just let you know that's us. And of course, we're working very closely with Papakura Marae, where Celia is based. So what we'd like to talk to is we've been thinking about, oh, well, what's our way of doing, what's our way of being, knowing and doing, and what do we think about value in this context? So I'm just going to give you a little bit of an introduction about the work that's been done to date, the approach, and then our whānau are going to talk to what they see as being valuable in working this way, and also the potential value of what the prototypes are teaching us, or what we're learning in terms of the prototypes we're testing. So it's been our pleasure to work with about 20 whānau that are living in, connected to, or have an association with Papakura here. And it's our process is geared to think about how do we support our whānau here in our community. I live here too. To think about what we can be doing differently to create thriving futures for our tamariki. And there was 2 parts to it. One is, what does it take to work this way so the process is genuinely and authentically whānau-led? And then what does it look like in terms of prototyping and testing to scale or grow the types of initiatives or responses that whānau tell us are useful and matter, basically. So those were sort of our big how might we. We didn't know what it would look like. It's been a bit messy and lots of learning. But at the heart of it is the kaupapa, which is thriving futures for our tamariki. And so the big picture stuff for us is how do we support whānau to drive systems innovation for thriving tamariki. So we believe that whānau-led innovation has the potential to create the types of systems innovation that some of our agencies, myself included, and when I say some agencies, and we haven't been able to achieve to date. And here they are. And I heard a little bit of kōrero about having, you know, people with in decision-making positions or with power and influence in the process. That's been our goal as well. So this is a picture of our whānau and our agency partners coming together in a co-design sprint where 4 prototypes were co-created, and we have 50% whānau in the room and 50% providers and agencies in the room coming together, looking at the 4 key insights that we have and thinking about, well, based on those insights, what could we be doing differently? And what's important to tell you about, I think, is our way of being is based on a tikanga-led practice. So this is an example of the types of principles and the expectations that we have of each other in the mahi. So these key principles help us to think about how are we being in the work and how are we being in relationship with each other as a whānau that's leading the innovation, but also as whānau in relationship with agency partners or innovation partners. So these things give us a really clear guide around the way that we should be treating each other, the work, and our environment. So the kaupapa of the work is very precious to us, so it has its own mana. So this tikanga framework, which is predominantly drawn from kaupapa Māori research methodologies and principles, this helps us to think about how do we acknowledge the mana of the people that we're working with, the mana of the kaupapa, the mana of our tamariki, and the mana of our environment. I won't go through those one by one, we haven't got much time, but to say this is what guides us. And then there's a second part to this way of being, and that's we have these principles as a guide, and we also have developed the whānau created a kawa that sits with the principles. And that kawa is a very specific way of describing our behavioural expectations of each other, the safe spaces that we need to have in place, and the way that we're going to be in the work. So we've got the key principles, and then the whānau describe in detail what they need in terms of a safe space and relationships inside of the process with the kawa. I won't spend too much time on this, but so that's the way of being in the process. The way of doing has been to triangulate design as a methodology, as a container, as a way of understanding the rhythm and the phasing of the work. And we've also drawn on Mātauranga Māori and Western science to understand what can we take the best of both of those knowledge systems and bring into the process and learn and generate new ideas and new thinking. In reality, it means, it means that you're having to think about those 3 things, those knowledge systems, hold the methodology in terms of, we used a design methodology, but what it means in practice is that you've got to do that while you're holding genuine and nurturing genuine and authentic relationships in the rōpū itself, as well as with your agency partners, holding systems, change theory and practice, and holding an emerging, what I would describe as an emerging methodology. And at the start of my mahi at the Southern Initiative, I started to call this whānau-centred design, and I don't call it that anymore. We would call it whānau-led systems innovation, because design is only one of the knowledge system that helps us to drive innovation. It's only one way. Mātauranga Māori does that as well. And drawing from the lived experience of whānau is another way that you can do that as well. And that's a really, really important part of our work, is that we're really careful to ensure that we are drawing on the insights, the stories of our whānau, but also we have whānau in the room leading this work as well. So what I describe whānau-led systems innovation is supporting our whānau to design their own local fit for purpose, strength-based solutions for some of our most complex social challenges. And that by default will drive systems innovation. And the reason for that is whānau always start in a different place. They often start with their own strengths, and they don't often start through a deficit lens. So they start in a different place, they think about things differently, and they welcome the complexity of people's lived experience and systems. And so we're really excited about our prototypes. I think they've got some real potential to drive systems change and transformation. That's probably another seminar. And so we come to this thing about value. And this is, for me, a fundamental challenge to agencies and to practitioners about when you talk about value, what are you talking about matters and to who? And who got to determine whether that was valuable? And we're trying to flip the script on that in this piece of work. So what we know, and what the cat's telling us, the grumpy cat's telling us, is that we know that the traditional way of measuring and tracking and evaluating is unlikely to drive innovation in of itself. So the things that we're counting now, if we keep counting the same things, we're unlikely to get a different result. And what we're trying to do in this piece of work, and whānau are leading us in, is to understand what really matters to whānau and how do we start to integrate what matters to whānau into compelling alternatives than what we have, than the status quo. And so I'll hand it over to the whānau now, and what they'll talk a little bit about is what's been, in their opinion, valuable about working this way, but also what's the value proposition in terms of the prototypes that have been developed. So I'll just hand it over to the whānau to talk about their experiences.
For me, being a part of this rōpū, I think what's different is the way we work, and like Angie said, our kawa, so the kawa that we've set, which means, you know, when we're not judged, we have our voice, and they actually hear us. So having that whānau voice, it's never been done before, especially in Papakura, I think anywhere, to be honest. So that's what keeps drawing me back to the rōpū, just knowing that we're in a safe place, just that we're valued, our voices actually mean something, and it's going to make a change for the futures of our babies. That's initially why I'm here, is because I have so many kids, and they are going to be brought up in Papakura knowing there is a group, or I don't really call it a group, it's more whānau. We're a whānau. We've built this friendship, we've built throughout this whole thing, with our confidence and everything that we hold close to us is actually, it's valuable. That's how I feel. I think with our prototypes, our first one being the Kite Aroha, that's our invitation. So initially, when we were going through the insights and stuff, we did find out that a lot of whānau tend to isolate themselves from systems. They would rather struggle in their homes without asking for help. So our first thing was our Kite Aroha, and that was our invitation. How do we get whānau like that who like to isolate? How do we get them to, how do we invite them in? And by doing this, we had a bag, we called it Kite Aroha, with it few things like there was colouring books, crayons, pencils, little board games, toys. So just little things that we were able to give to our whānau, and we actually got surveys, we did surveys about them as well, and we saw that those actually reduced stress in their homes. Some families didn't even have that kind of stuff, so the pencils and stuff like that, that's normally very easy to, you know, I think with pencils, pens and stuff, you should have access to it for your kids. Some of those families didn't have that. So they were grateful, very grateful in what I did, what our rōpū did with our invitation. And yeah, I think it to a lot of families, it helped them, especially during our lockdown, because that's when we first handed them out. At the same time, we built those friendships where if they needed any help with anything during lockdown, like food or anything like that, we'd let them know, hey, there's pātakas, hey, there's the marae that does food parcels and stuff like that. So we were connected through Facebook, through some were texting, and just having that that support around the lockdown, I think helped a lot of whānau, especially mine too.
Yeah, with the kete aroha, I noticed that a lot of people I knew, they self-isolated. They were very grateful for the kete. However, they were still not ready to put themselves out there, I suppose you can call it. Still, I don't know what to call it. I want to say damaged, but that's not the word I want to use. So I still check in on them, see if they're okay. But yeah, even in the lockdown, we had some trying moments. The marae helped out a lot. I was one of those families that, because we were a working class family, my husband and I found it even more harder to ask for help, because I was a beneficiary. Then my husband got a job, so we do know the difference between how easy it was to ask for help being on a benefit than the more things we had to prove being a working class family. So we were one of those families who would rather just sit at home and sell our TVs to get our kids some food. It actually got to the point where I'd rather come to the marae and ask for help than ask working income, even though we had entitlement sitting there. I carry on coming here because I went to school in Papakura, but I wasn't born or raised in Papakura. I was actually raised in Manurewa. I got in with the wrong crowd, started hanging around on the streets. So if I can change that, so that my kids will never have to go through that, then I'm going to take that opportunity. Change it so my kids, my grandchildren, their friends don't ever have to go through the stupid things I went through.
Aren't they amazing? At the risk of not being able to screen share again, I just wanted to tell you fellas, you know, like what we're learning about these prototypes is it's not about the bag. Sorry, Coles. It's not about the bag. It's what it's about is it's about scaling manaakitanga and whanaungatanga in your community. It's about building social capital. It's about creating pro-social relationships that whānau who are socially isolated might not have. So what the kete helps us to do is invite whānau who are socially isolated into relationship and into trust. And the invitation is from whānau. It's not from agency and it's not from provider. And what we're trying to figure out is how we grow that. So here's some of the things on screen that our whānau have said has been quite valuable about the way that we work. And it's really, really interesting. Most of what is on there is not a service. We don't contract these types of things. New pro-social relationships, new friendships, social capital that they didn't have before, opportunities to lead, opportunities to heal in safe spaces make an immediate difference for our whānau, and whānau tell us that's what they're wanting to create for other whānau, whether that's working this way or whether that's it's embedded into the prototypes that we created. So we take all these things that whānau tell us matter and co-create some stuff with agencies, and we try to integrate that into what we think will be useful for whānau in the future. You've heard about the kete, that's really just an invitation into trust and relationship again for whānau. We have this other amazing one, which we haven't quite figured out how to do it, but we will, which is about how do we unlock some of the social capital or human capital that some of our agency leaders have, and they might not be able to share it through the service provision or the program that they're currently delivering. So one of the things we've learned is from working with agencies, our whānau have told us, you know what, after I meet these people and I get to know a bit about them and trust them, what I want from them is their expertise, their experience, their skill, their knowledge and their support. I don't necessarily want their service or their program. I just want them to help me with my aspirations, with all of that great stuff they've got. So what we're trying to create is, it's not a mentoring thing because it's reciprocal, because these guys are pretty amazing too, and they'll give back into agencies as much as they'll learn out of agency leader support. But what we're trying to create is a prototype where local agency leaders can share their social capital with whānau in support of their aspiration, not in support of a need or a problem, but for our whānau to really be able to dream about what they want for their tamariki themselves, and then for people who have, you know, a whole heap of social capital or different social capital in this case, to be able to support whānau towards those aspirations. We're not expecting that they will be achieved in 6 weeks or a year. We're expecting the relationship will continue to support. Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about the value of working together this way in a values-led or a tikanga way to drive this innovation, and what we also see in these prototypes that are created, co-created with agencies and whānau, but led by whānau and based on lived experiences. The two prototypes we just talked about, an invitation into trust through the kete aroha and an invitation to support aspirations with social capital. Those types of prototypes are really helping us to think about how we reimagine the future. And here in the Papakura context, it's about creating an ecology of support for whānau where we have alternatives to the status quo, and we're building the types of support responses and networks that support well-being. And so the prototypes in themselves, I'm really excited about them because they're based on lived experience and in the terms of insights, and they're led by whānau. It means that there's some complexity, integrity. So it's so hard for us to lean in, I say us, it's really hard for traditional institutions and practice to lean into the complexity of people's lived experience and of our systems, but these guys are living that every day, so they welcome it and they help us to navigate it. So these prototypes, I believe, have some complexity and integrity, which means we think they are geared up not to solve it, but to be able to acknowledge it and navigate the complexity. The second is they are alternatives to the status quo. They're compelling alternatives. So when we talk about we're scaling out manaakitanga and whanaungatanga, we're thinking about unlocking social capital for aspirations. They're alternatives to deficit-based service models and programs, and they're not programmatic. They're about values and relationship. Not to say we don't need those services, and not to say people are doing a good job of delivering those services and helping whānau, but what we fundamentally believe is that these types of prototypes in this work are going to move us away from crisis intervention into wellbeing models that are values based. And that's what our big vision for the future is our future is everybody's well, and we don't actually need all these crisis interventions and services, and we're helping each other to be well. So that's sort of the big dream for us. And so that's why we're so excited about our prototypes. Someone's going to ask about scale and all of that, you know, some great questions about that. And the answer is we don't know. We don't know, but we're going to figure it out. We're going to figure it out. We just know what looks like it has potential. And by the end of the year, we're going to have a case for transformation, which talks about the learning out of our prototypes and what the systems opportunities might be to grow it and support it, or to fundamentally reconfigure a resource so that we can start to do those types of things for whānau can do them for themselves actually, and community. But that's probably a good place to stop. Thanks for the opportunity to share, and everybody keep up all the good mahi, I guess.
Kia ora, awesome, thank you so much. We're just going to do a similar thing where we just take a minute for people just to jot down some thoughts and pātai in the chat, and then we've got a few minutes just to circle back and dig a little bit deeper into some of the kōrero that you've shared. So just lots of different places people could go, and yeah, you've shared just lots of different dimensions. There's some interesting commonalities with the whakaro from this morning around values and working in support of aspirations, but also really, it's also really the difference in terms of whānau-led, starting with what you guys care about and using that as the start point that's being led out of where you are in community, as opposed to that service, you know, delivering better services. So really interesting contrast with some common crossovers, and then quite at the different end of the scale around, you know, whānau-led systems innovation. So really appreciate the contrast, the quite powerful contrast between the two different kind of stories and experiences. I'm just, maybe if we could dig into a little bit about the journey. I know that you guys have been on a journey yourselves as a ropu together as a whānau, but also that you've taken a few government agencies who are not used to working in this way, kind of are pretty used to having the answers, are pretty used to offering answers and services. You've taken them on a real journey too, to shift and to work quite differently. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that journey with agencies, and kind of in a way the partnering that actually Cheree also talked about, like how that's turned into more of a partnership between whānau and agencies. If you could jump into that a little bit, that'd be awesome. Kia ora.
For me, in the beginning, it was quite nerve-wracking. Like I said, I had trust issues, isolated myself. I'll be honest, I wasn't looking forward to meeting any of them. I only went there because I kind of wanted to tell them where to shove it. And then when I met them, they were nothing like the people that we speak to on the daily. They're like, I know this is going to sound stupid, but they're normal. They're not stuck up with their nose in the air like the people that are at the centres that we have to face every time we go in there. They're like, yeah, they're normal. And now I don't know if I'd say they're friends, but I actually like them.
So I was early when I turned up to the first agency meeting. Honestly, I walked in the door and Angie's like, come on, Carlos. I turned around, I was like, because none of our other ropu was there yet. I literally, Angie had already started. She was like, yep. So I walked up the stairs to where we were at Bruce Pullen, and when I got there, I literally put my foot through the door, looked at Angie and all of the agencies, and I was like, oh, no. And I walked out. Later on, Angel's like, come on, Cos, it's okay, come on. So I came in, and as the day went on, I literally made heaps of friends. I spoke with everyone, just same experience as Ra. I used to dread if I needed help for my kids going into work and income, because to me it felt like the people behind the desks or the case managers I was seeing, they just continuously judged me. And however, I had everything there that they needed, my bank statements, where the money, you know, I provided everything they needed. However, they looked at me like I was another nigger. That's how I felt. That I wasn't, that I wasn't worth helping, that I abused the system like other people did. However, I didn't. And I think that's what made me like get scared when I first met the agencies. However, now I have friends in work and income and kaingaora and oranga tamariki. Yeah, like I've built friendships with them, and you know, seeing them out in public, I'm like, hey, hi, and you know, before I'll probably go, oh, that's the lady from but yeah, my whole perspective of agencies has changed being a part of this rōpū.
Meeting them actually
Yeah, cool.
reminded me that it's not the people in the agencies I had an issue with, it's the way that they use their power in the agency. And it's not even everyone there, it's just certain people that need to be retrained and reminded why they took the job.
I'd just like to say, of course, this is not always the experience of whānau in agencies, and there's lots of people in agencies that are doing really great mahi. What's been really interesting about this, what's made it really interesting and the learning out of this is fundamentally all we're trying to do is collapse the distance between centralised power and our most isolated whānau. So we like to be very careful about the way we curate the space where there are agency leaders and whānau coming together as equals with the same mana for the same kaupapa. So that's been a really powerful opportunity, the platforming of the space, the safe space for agencies to come together with whānau in that way. And often we're collapsing 6 and 7 levels of bureaucracy and power by having whānau in the room who are experiencing isolation, even extreme inequity, and people that are coming together who do have power and influence inside of our system. So we like to do that more because it's building empathy inside a system, but it's also building empathy for whānau about how hard it is to work inside the system at times as well.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and just really want to recognise what you've shared, the three of you, in that most people in the public service are turning up every day because they care and they want to help, and we have to be really mindful of the history and the experiences that services and government has created for people. It's not a clean slate. There is, you know, heaps of trauma and recompounding of crisis on people. So, you know, they have to own that reality of what the history of those relationships are, and really, if we want to work together, it is about the spaces for friendship, the spaces for getting to know each other, right? It's not like, oh, hi, let's work together, we're going to partner on something, we're going to jump into some co-design. Like, it's the realness of people's experiences and building trust with each other. So I think you've just really, you know, it's really important for us to acknowledge that we might want to work together, but we've got to grapple with what's been and then get to a point where we can move forward together. So just really appreciate that sharing. There's some stuff around what government needs to think about to enable in this way, and the work that Cheree and Leigh shared this morning and what you guys have talked about, it's asking government to be differently, right? And there's also an emphasis beyond services here, that actually government can work in a way that enables communities to lead their own things, to build their own change, to take leadership, in that space, it isn't all about service responses. It's actually about catalysing and supporting the aspiration, the know-how, the knowledge, the innovation that's already resident in communities, and that how important social capital is to that. So just a final comment on either the role of social capital and connection, or around how government needs to be, would just be awesome before we go into a different processing space. Kia ora.
I just got a thought about the social capital thing and how it becomes beyond services, and that is what we're imagining is resilient whānau to whānau networks that support you with positive relationships and the social capital, the collective social capital, so that you can access support or relationship whether you're well or whether you need something. And that's a fundamental, it goes across the spectrum of keeping whānau well wherever they are on that spectrum. And that's really a different way of thinking about what the sort of responses for whānau might look like other than a service. So what we know from the kiti is that our whānau here, once they had engaged other whānau through the kiti and we went into lockdown, they instinctively contacted those other whānau and said, did you know about the marae, they do this? Did you know about that thing down the road? Did you know I've got this? And what we learned is we had enough resource to look after everybody in Papakura. We had plenty of resource. We didn't have enough trusted relationships for some whānau to be able to access it. And what we're trying to think about is what is that live network of whānau to whānau that keeps in relationship, keeps supporting whānau based on whatever the aspiration is or whatever the need is, in relationship in a supportive way.
Again, just thank you so much. I've heard you share a few times and just always learn something. I love the comment about, you know, inside government, we're usually making decisions based on data. That's a long way away from the complexity, and that whānau welcome the complexity. That's the lived reality. I just think that's a really powerful concept, and I hadn't picked up on that one from the last kōrero, so just, yeah, I've written that down. But again, just thank you so much for your sharing, for your challenge, for your honesty, for your warmth and participating in this kaupapa and kōrero. Thank you. We'll gather up the questions and feedback too, because you may want to respond to those offline as well. So thank you again. Koutou. So for the last little part of our time together today, we want to take the opportunity to do a little bit of processing together and collective sense making of the different examples that we've heard from people and how this connects to your own experiences, the questions that you have and the things that you're working with, and allow the group to do some of that collective sense making together. So you've heard different examples of ways of working that enable partnership, that enable co-creation, that enable people to design together. One of the key things that is significant in the stories that we've heard is we're not focused on an intervention that comes out the end of a design process or a silver bullet that's going to somehow address a very complex issue. It's much more about the process and how people are working to build trust, to build relationships, to build other kinds of capacities and capabilities, that as well as the types of things that may get produced. So just shifting our expectation from really focusing necessarily on the thing at the end, but the way in which people are working as being as powerful for shifting towards change. So I just want to frame that as a sort of a thing to think about as you go into this conversation. So we're going to have a conversation together and then come back out again and then hear a little from Desna and our sort of wrapping up and setting up for tomorrow. So you will now get put back into the same groups as before. If you end up for some reason alone or there's no one there, just let us know and we'll rejig you into another group. If it's new people, introduce yourselves. But the invitation now is just to say, you know, what have you been hearing about being and knowing and doing and the value of this way of working? How does that compare to some of our normal expectations or current practice around what we should be paying attention to? So we're just going to give you 10, maybe 15 minutes to have a conversation about that. Would really like you to just capture a few bullet points and drop that back into the chat so we get a collective sense of what's coming up for people. If you are the person that's going to scribe for your group, don't do it in the chat window, because when you come back to the large group, you'll lose your little chat window. So do it in an email or a Word doc or on your notes or something. So jump into a group, have a conversation about what you've heard, what's showing up for you. And then if one person could just capture a few of those things. So over the 3 days, we're going to build a bit of a picture about what questions are coming up or what themes are coming up through the group and through your own perspective. So we'll see you back here in 10 or 15 minutes. So welcome back again. I do hope that there was enough time just to get into a little bit of sharing and connecting and unpacking and linking into your own experiences and ways of working. So if you were the lucky person that put your hand up or was delegated to scribe, it would be fantastic just to get some thoughts from the group and dropped into the chat. And it's our way of being able to build a bit of a collective sense making of what's standing out for people, what's important, what's coming up. Yeah, so some great feedback and comments here about how KPIs and funding requirements and those kind of infrastructure. So we're going to dig more into that over the next couple of days, particularly on Friday. People making the observations about making sure that Western science or Western knowledge isn't privileged, and how do we create more balance around what constitutes knowing and knowledge and those perspectives. Prioritizing lived experience, that disconnect between what's happening at community level and what happens in our regulatory or policy making environments. So some great observations and notes here, which we will package up and share back and pull out some of the key themes overnight, share a little bit in the morning with you about where people got to, and make this available as a sort of map of, you know, the kind of issues and the location of where we're up to as a group. If you've got a bunch of notes in front of you, take a photo so that if you lose your notes between now and tomorrow morning, you've got a record of the things that came up. If you're interested in sharing a snippet or any of what you've captured, we would love to have that to kind of put as part of our working board and sharing back. So obviously we're not going to share anything that is confidential or that it's particular, but if there's a particular part of your notes that you want to share or a diagram or anything, take a snapshot and email it. I'll put this email in the chat as well. We'd love to get a collection of some of the things that people have been capturing that we can share back as part of that sense making process over the next couple of days. And now I'm just going to pass over to Desna Whaanga-Schollum, who is also one of the collaborators on this event, to introduce herself and just do some unpacking, and there'll be an invitation for you guys to help us with some sense making overnight and just add some of your thoughts individually as well.
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nonoi, ko roko mai wahine me Kahungunu me Ngāti pāhawera ngā iwi, ko Ngāi tahu matawhaiti tōku hapu, no mahia hou, ko taiporatu tōku kainga tūturu, ko taiporatu tōku tōku whenua, tōku awa, tōku moana, horutu ana te tairere ana te wai, tūtonu te pā, tūtonu tono tō mātou kainga ko taiporatu. Ko Desna Whaanga-Schollum tōku ingoa. I'm the kaihautu for Ngā Aho, the National Network of Māori Designers. We work across a pretty broad landscape of different talkie around designing Māori futures. Yeah, it's been a pretty amazing today. Kōrero, that landscape of kōrero, should I say, that have been shared today. The scale of going from sort of government experiences about working in the space down to sort of whānau and hapu and marae and feet on the ground kind of experiences really resonated with me. I think there were just so many points in the kōrero that really made me think about where do I locate myself within this landscape. I think without something with our pepeha, with the way that tangata whenua introduce themselves, is that we do think about where our bones lie. So where are our iwi from? So ko waito iwi, where are your ancestors' bones from? So to locate yourself within this landscape is, for me, I think really thinking about how can I be, more so than my role, more so than what my job is, more so than the tools that I've been given, but how do I be within a space? So there's different scales that were talked about today, and a few of them that really resonated with me were, we have tikanga or strategies that set out principles about what we think that we should do and how we think that we should do them, and often they're sort of set out in a way that doesn't make them tangible on our day-to-day lived reality. So going from those sort of high level principles down to a kawa, which Angie and her whānau described, and brought it down to a smaller, more immediate scale. So what's your kawa? What's your way that you do these things within this particular space, within this particular moment, and with these particular people? So how can I be within this space, and to actually really, really consider that. And then at a more granular level as well, to think about your own values. So what is your purpose? What is it that you think that you've basically been put on this planet to do? You know, a lot of us have chosen to be public servants. So what does it mean to actually be a servant? And what does it mean to be a leader as well? If you're sitting within government and you're a leader, so you have a purpose, and there's a reason why you've chosen that kind of pathway for yourself. So I think to fundamentally be able to change the way that we do things, we actually really have to think about have a deeper look inside ourselves, which Shenagh, our host this morning, spoke to, and take some of that personal journey. Really think about, so what are my values? What am I exemplifying in my mahi, and how can I be on a day-to-day basis the things that I wish that I could see rippling out in amongst my community? How am I being reflective rather than reactive? And how am I serving the purpose of creating well-being? There's so many different levels of power that were spoken about today too, when you think about sort of our central government, and from a iwi hapu whānau kind of perspective, some of the manuscripts and knowings that I have from my elders is that's not necessarily the way that we constructed our communities. So one of the things that we're unpicking when we're talking about power shift is that at some point there's been a centralised government which is taking our feet off the ground, so that we, and a way to a sort of a disembodied knowledge system that doesn't give the power back to the people that live in those particular places and in those particular situations. And so this has taken away some of the understanding of our complexity of the way that we live our day-to-day lives. So I think we can all be kind of experts to a certain degree in what complexity is if we would just actually allow ourselves to be ourselves when we come to our workplaces. So ngā mihi to you all for opening yourselves up to that kind of, to that journey. We've got some pretty challenging kōrero that are going to come through tomorrow, which will shift from, well, how do we deal with some of those sticky issues? Things like the justice system will come through, which are, you know, some of the really big things that we have to shift. But I really appreciated today the personal way that some of our presenters were talking about the things that they learnt from their day-to-day situations. Like you could hear Tuakana Teina coming through. It wasn't like the service provider that like tracked in there and said, I'm the expert and I know everything. Like everybody always spoke to the fact that they've learnt things from these situations. So yeah, I think that's something really important for us to consider as well. I'm a little bit, sometimes a bit of a tech novice, but what we've decided to do is share some ideas via Slido again. So maybe just some of about what's, going back to our central theme, which is what's emerging about ways of being and knowing and doing. So how am I self, and what do I know about this situation, and how am I going to do that within my work? If we can sort of just have a couple of moments to put some ideas into Slido, and then we'll come back and check in with everybody before we haere tonu. So, kia ora. Kia ora whānau, thank you for sharing those thoughts. We're going to scoop up some of these reflections that everybody has had and hopefully share those after our gathering so that we can all look back at these things and check in, I guess, with what it is that we've managed to learn over these days collectively. I just wanted to close us today with a karakia, and closing karakia, I wanted to share one that was authored by Rhonda Tibble that speaks to Marae kura, because we opened this morning with a waiata that spoke to Marae kura, so the feminine in the way that we do things. Ngā mihi. Tuku tuku te rangaranga whetū ao, no te hautapu o ngā rehua, whakahikia hei tātai ki te uma e, whakakōpani ake ki te hiringa matua, hei Māori whakaoho a Hine, I whare ahuru e ui ana ki te hora, he takapau wharanoi ki te taumata iho wahine, hike iho ki taku kau ariki, he umu kā tamu, moku nei e. Mauri ora.